You know, sometimes being in the climate world, I feel like we're the hopeless romantics of the activist world. The seas are rising, the land is drying out. We've got a firestorm in one season and then a polar vortex in the next. And that's not even considering all of the political, economic, social, cultural challenges that are in our way to even do anything about it. But, instead of just tuning that all out, instead of at the end of our busy days just watching Netflix on the couch, we're all in this room here right now, and we're staring straight into the heart of this seemingly hopeless situation. Because we're determined to fix this mess. We believe that not only can we stop the destruction of our planet, but at the same time, create a better world than the one we live in now. For people outside of the climate movement, this might seem like mere idealism, but I believe that we have a secret that makes our dreams much more realistic than they may appear. Our secret is that we think differently. We know that we can't solve climate change with the same thinking that caused it. We view the future through a different lens. I believe that the way we conceptualize a crisis often defines how we respond to it. And so I would like to ask you all in this group a question to learn from your experience and wisdom as climate activists and to better understand the way that you view the future. And so my question to you all is, what types of thinking do you feel we need in order to break free from our fossil fueled economy and envision a truly sustainable society? So I'm going to open this up for discussions and thoughts from you all.
Unselfish thinking.
What was that?
I said like unselfish.
Unselfish thinking.
Is that even a word? I don't know.
Selfless,
selfless. Maybe that was what I was going for.
Yeah. Service oriented, collective.
Well, we need to realize that what we do makes a difference, even though we think it's only our little part of the world. You know, the garbage that gets thrown out the window or the plastic that we generate in our kitchen from the grocery store. It adds up. When you talk about millions and billions of people, the little actions that you make get multiplied exponentially. And that, I think the whole concept of exponential is just something that humans have a really difficult time grasping.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I mean, we have those, in terms of small actions, we have both the things that we do in our individual lives through those choices, as well as like the choices we make in how we take collective action. And that's through what you all doing, through getting involved in CCL. It's like we as individuals can have this collective power through working on that kind of stuff. And it does make a difference. Yeah, Tony.
Optimism.
Optimism. Okay.
Yeah. And don't let the bastards get you down. Don't. One of the biggest things I got at CCL is the quote: "Cynicism is surrender," and I like that a lot. It's too easy to be cynical.
That's really good. Yeah, I really like that. Cynicism.
I'm not giving up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to obviously face our fears with climate change and the bad stuff, but that's a good entry point, but shouldn't be the end. Like we need that hope and what we can actually do about it in order to keep us going. Janet.
What I have discovered is lots and lots of ways to change my behavior to a more sustainable ways. I've learned it from a lot from my friends at CCL and other friends that are like-minded. And it's, and I'm encouraged too, because I see corporations moving in that direction. I think some of them are probably just doing it, it's in name only, but there are others that are really out there making a difference, and that gives me hope.
Yeah, definitely. Like mindset change, then following with actual behavior change, and hopefully resource shifting at personal and then hopefully society-wide level. Mark.
Thank you. Just on thinking, first of all, climate change is something that we need to address outside of the local level. We need leadership, and every technology has a beginning and an end. So oil, John D. Rockefeller started with oil about 1890. It's about 120, 130 years old. There are other technologies that are ready to replace it. And how do you get people to embrace those technologies, these clean technologies? Solar panels, the price is dropping like a stone. And in some areas of the country, we should never be supplying energy from fossil fuels. Like the Southwest has tons of sunshine, and that should be part of our foreign policy at the national level. So how do you get these people who are heavily lobbied to change to the new reality?
Yeah. I mean, that is a very big question and a very big challenge, and one that it seems like that CCL is focused on, and cool to see that you all are addressing it at that larger level. But yeah, I like that point you made a lot about technologies have a beginning and an end. You see that for thousands of years horses were our major form of transportation, and then and the amount of stables that were part of our mobility infrastructure, stables were key, and then within 40 years they were all gone. So things can change fast. We have better stuff, so that's a good point. Thank you. Doug.
I would say we need to think long term. We need to get companies to think further out than the next quarterly profit report to Wall Street. And we as individuals need to think longer than the next 30 or 60 days. We all need to think, 10, 20, 50 years out, while also recognizing for many people that's not economically feasible. When you're not sure how you're going to pay the rent at the end of the month, you really don't want the price of gasoline to go up, and you really want the cheapest heating you can get. And you don't care about 60 days out because you might get evicted. So we need to recognize that. But, that being said, we just need to start thinking in terms of years instead of in terms of weeks or months.
Yeah. I mean, the systems that we created to destroy the planet took hundreds of years to take form fully. And it will take, a while to get out of it. We're kind of in this multi-generational relay race of healing the planet, and it's many different policies that will be needed, and many different smaller local actions and state actions across many different levels. And so yeah, I like that kind of long-term thinking, that thinking about both the long-term negative impacts as well as this kind of long-term journey that we're on together to create a better world and prevent the destruction of our planet. It's really important.
Yeah. So let me also add, this is Marco. Let me also add another quick comment here. Actually, if you think of it, the solution is extremely simple. It's all based on financial incentives, in essence, externalities. So in the past, we didn't account for the cost of these externalities. If you do account for the cost of those, then you don't have to change anything in the current system. You now are actually doing the right financial accounting. And so as a principle, I want to bring that in. That's actually extremely simple as a concept and extremely effective. Now, the change from today to a system where that's accounted for is the hard part. But from the concept standpoint, it's extremely simple. It's the, like, I'll make an analogy. It's the same thing as like when you're young, you can drink like a beer and drink pizza and eat pizza. And you can probably do that for 10 to 20 years without any bad health effects, but eventually it catches up. It's kind of the same thing. So yeah, I wouldn't say we're kind of intentionally per se destroying stuff. It's more that our systems were not set up to account for all the costs that are incurred for the activities that we do.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We are incentivizing a system and a system of choices that are inherently destructive to the planet, rather than ones that are healing or restorative. And you don't have to look very far at the way we allocate subsidies to see how that happens in agriculture, how that happens in energy, how that happens in our industrial systems. The way the challenge is often that it's once we start a certain subsidy for something, it can be very hard to take it away. And industries will fight tooth and nail to preserve that. And it definitely creates a challenge for readjusting the incentives. But I think the elegance of at least your approach with carbon pricing is that it takes one thing and readjusts an entire incentive structure in the market. Any other thoughts before we move on? Great. So there are obviously many different types of thinking that are crucial to re-envisioning and creating this sustainable society. In conversations with, I interviewed probably about 200 to 300 people for this book. These were people who are experts across a variety of different areas in sustainability, including people working on transportation, people in energy, people in agriculture, in industrial systems. I talked to many of these different people, and out of these conversations, these three types of thinking kept coming up. And so I wanted to share these with you all to add to your repertoire of sustainable thinking and spark discussion and creativity. And so these different types of thinking were, number one, systems thinking, which is all about finding the deeper patterns hiding in plain sight, about looking beyond the surface level and looking at how one potential policy has impacts across many different systems, or how one potential action or approach has impacts across many different systems. The second is community thinking, and that's about embracing local people as beneficiaries of change. And though I know that you all focus on a larger federal policy, I think baked into what you do is the dividend part, which is about tying that change to what the benefit is for anyone on the ground. And so even though community has this connotation of it's only local, well, larger things and larger policies affect communities in different ways. And so it's really important to think about, as we design those larger policies, what are the potential implications for people at a local level, and how are they empowered as beneficiaries of change. And then thirdly is regeneration thinking. And that's all about creating both systems and communities that grow stronger and healthier over time, that with every passing year, rather than degrading and getting less stable or less strong, that they become more resilient to crises that might occur, or better able to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves. And so when we talk about systems thinking, it's all about looking at things as interconnected and multiple interdependencies being as affecting each other rather than disconnected parts. It's about, rather than seeing things as moving from point A to point B in a linear trajectory, looking at the end of one cycle, beginning the start of a new one. It's about looking at things emerging at once together rather than as separate silos. And it's looking at the whole rather than solely the parts. And so I wanted to share a story that I think highlights well the difference between a traditional reductionist approach and a systems thinking approach. This particular experience I had, which I like to call the parable of the techie and the farmer, was a conversation that I had when I was living in San Francisco. I was in front of the ferry building and was having a conversation with a quote unquote tech genius. And when we were talking about, the conversation came to climate change. And when we were talking about it, he made the point that organic farming, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, all of that is completely pointless. If we wanted to really focus on sequestering carbon in the ground, we should not be focusing on growing plants in a regenerative way, but we should be putting giant carbon capture machines on that land, because we'll be able to sequester carbon more efficiently. And you know, he's probably right. Yeah, you probably would be able to capture more carbon per acre with a giant direct air capture machine. But he was approaching it from a solely reductionist rather than systems thinking approach. If you were to look at the same problem from a systems approach, you'd see that the only benefit of a carbon capture system is carbon capture, where a regenerative organic farm on a small scale or a large scale provides many different benefits. It grows nutritious food, it holds water better during times of drought, it absorbs water better during flooding, providing almost like an infrastructure benefit during different fluctuations in weather. It maybe even provides a gathering place for people in the community to learn about agriculture and the world of growing food that sustains us, and to develop new skills. And so I share this story because it really lays bare how silly sometimes it looks when we're only focusing on maximizing one thing and optimizing for one thing, and what that potentially creates and what that might look like. And so if we step back and look at the way we've designed our world, we often see that we've really approached it from this reductionist way of thinking, where both the pattern of cities and farms are often like monocultures. We focus on maximizing residential buildings in one area, commerce in another, offices in another, and industry in another. And we're not thinking about like what does a vibrant neighborhood look like when we're designing a city. The same goes for how we've designed farms. We plant corn, soy, wheat, and then animals all in separate areas, really trying to maximize a handful of metrics without looking at what the health of the soil is, and how the benefits of combining different types of crops within one system gives to the soil and gives to production in a different sense at the same time. And so if we were to approach that same problem, but from a systems thinking approach, this is one example in Gilbert, Arizona, of how a developer designed a community and a neighborhood using systems thinking rather than traditional reductionist thinking. When developers were about to turn this one farm into just a regular subdivision, they instead decided to create an organic farm and then build a residential community around it. And at the same time, they converted the old tractor shed into a place for small businesses and craft makers. They converted the old farmhouse into a restaurant. They created a coffee shop. They created all of these other kind of mixed use things in this residential community. In addition to like mixing different types of ages and types of housing. They had a senior living facility, a school, and out of it, they created a destination in the area where people come to visit the craft makers, where people come to visit the restaurant, where people in the neighborhood can walk to things in town, and where people can also access the organic produce from the farm and learn about farming. And the farm is actually like a wedding venue too. So they have all these other benefits that came out of it when they were thinking about designing it from a systems perspective, rather than solely from a, like, we just want to get the most housing out of it as possible and the most restaurants out of this one area as possible. And another thing to consider as well is in systems thinking is the interdependence of top down and bottom up. And so when we design top down solutions, they obviously have an effect on how things play out at the local level. And so thinking about like, what are the potential implications of a price on carbon, or of something like a Green New Deal, or different standards and regulations. But then bottom up also puts pressure on the decisions that end up getting made sometimes at the higher level, not as often, but sometimes the concerns bubble up there. So it's also, systems are kind of this interplay between top down and bottom up. Second type of thinking is, and sorry, Doug, I just wanted to do a time check. How much time do we have?
Oh, I think we have until 8 o'clock, 8:15.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just keep going. Cool. The second type of thinking is community thinking, which is all about thinking about how do we shift the benefits of change to community. So in the traditional fossil fuel economy, most of the benefits went to, at least from the revenue generated from fossil fuels, go to either fossil fuel companies or utilities. And obviously we do benefit from, fossil fuels in our daily lives through driving and our modern world, but the overall economic system is set up to only benefit a handful of people. With renewable energy, we're starting to see that there are many different types of models that can shift the economic benefit to the community at the same time. One example is that we have in California is community choice energy. And it's an energy provider that was kind of like an energy nonprofit provider that started in one county, where basically residents wanted to choose what energy was provided in their county. And it was eventually enabled anyone in the state through a proposition in the state for any group of cities to band together to choose where their energy comes from, as well as choose where to spend the surplus revenue from consumers who are buying electricity through this provider. And many of the providers are now on track to get to 100% renewables by 2025. And though it started in one county, more than half of the state's electricity comes from one of these providers. And there's now 19 or I think 21 of these community choice providers throughout the state. And the surplus revenue they invest back into community projects, or give back, as some people give them back as dividends to the consumers. And oftentimes it ends up being, the energy ends up being 10 to 30% cheaper than from the utility, because they're really focused on how do we have this be a benefit to the people who are buying the energy and for the communities that we serve. So community thinking is often about adapting solutions to local needs and visions, and to look at both what are the challenges as well as strengths and resources in each local area. This is an example of Coalfield Development, which is an organization in West Virginia that trains laid-off coal miners to transform old surface mines, which are basically a mountain which has been destroyed, and transform them into food forests to create new jobs and produce healthy food, and train people on a variety of different skills. And this one initiative is one of 5 different kind of social enterprises that they've created, which are based on addressing specific needs that this one community in Appalachia has, and drawing on specific strengths in that area. So they have a construction company that builds affordable housing. They have a furniture and craft making company. They have a solar installation company. And they actually acquired a t-shirt company that makes t-shirts and apparel for Major League Baseball using recycled plastic bottles. And everyone who is hired to work for this in one of these different enterprises receives a personal development. They receive training in their area of like a new skill, as well as sponsorship and payment to get a 2 years associate's degree. And they also draw on the strengths of the area. They reference some of their principles being gumption, grit, and grace, which are these Appalachian values, which they argue are really important for when we go about trying to create a sustainable future. The experience of people who have survived and made a living in the mountains for generations, and the ability to like fix things really well, and focus on craft and focus on resiliency is extremely helpful, and kind of something that we can all learn from. And so it's also important to draw on to address both local needs as well as draw on strengths, that the unique strengths of each area. And then this is another example on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And this is an example of multi-solving using both a systems approach as well as a community focus at the same time. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, there is very high unemployment, as high as 70%. Some people are surviving on as little as $7,000 a day. There's a severe housing shortage. About 99% of produce, it comes in on trucks, and there's very little, or from outside of the community, and there's very little access to healthy foods or any kind of grocery store. And so what this organization did, which they actually started small as a spiritual circle, is they went about thinking of how do we address all of these myriad of different problems in our community by using in one project, like with kind of like one project that has a systems effect that is solving for creating systemic change. One of the quotes I heard from someone there is, with traditional aid, it was all about just like what are the basic needs of people and just handing it out. And he said, we don't want to hand out pro-painted Pampers every month. We know people need that, but it's not really systemic change that actually makes people's lives better. And so they built this kind of multifaceted initiative and community that is, they're training youth in construction to build housing for people who are lacking housing in the area, to work on that housing shortage. They created an egg and chicken program, which provides eggs to local supermarkets or even convenience stores where there was no kind of access to healthy protein before, as well as folks in need. They have a regenerative organic farm that grows fresh produce. And then they have a community center as well that trains people in everything from financial literacy to reviving cultural practices and heritage that was lost during the era of colonization, including the Lakota language and different indigenous cuisine and many different ceremonies and celebrations to both revive confidence as well as build skills at the same time. And all of it is powered by renewable energy through solar panels throughout this entire community, which should eventually house about 800 people. So the third type of thinking is regenerative thinking. And regeneration can be thought in many different ways. It can be thought as regenerating the land. So how do we recharge the soil so that every year it becomes stronger with every harvest rather than degrading with every harvest, where we have to put in chemical nutrients in order to revive our soils. This is an example of a organization in Minnesota that Reginaldo Hazlet Marroquin has designed a permaculture system using both fruit and nut trees and chickens that's set up to be profitable and easily adopted by immigrant farm workers to start their own kind of enterprises and businesses, using some of the original agricultural skills that they have, but kind of applying this regenerating the land thinking to it, and applying kind of the competitive advantage of regenerating your soil and not having to use as many inputs when chickens provide, in this particular system, when chickens and leaf litter and all of the different practices provide that fertility to make the land stronger, so that over time it actually becomes more, the system becomes more profitable and more productive. And then also, it's important to think about how we regenerate materials. So regeneration of all of the different exotic and complex materials from all the products in our economy. This is an example of a company out of British Columbia, Ronin 8, which has developed a technology to regenerate e-waste and lithium-ion batteries using sound. They use basically this massive tuning fork that is able to separate all of the fiberglass and the many different metals that are in our electronic devices. They said it's almost like we have a periodic table's worth of elements in a smartphone. And using the sound energy, they're able to, in a non-toxic way, separate the copper, the tin, the lead, the gold, the palladium, the rare earth metals, in order to be thinking about all these materials as cycles. And so that when we create the next generation of gadgets, we are not just discarding them, and often they end up in developing countries in either Africa as well as Bangladesh and India, where they create very toxic situations and create hazards for communities where they're using in in not very good conditions, trying to separate out just a few valuable materials, including the gold or the copper that might be in some of these electronics. But instead thinking about it, how do we do it? We have a technology to do it in a way that is non-hazardous and creates these many different cycles, so that each time we innovate on a new technology, we're regenerating all of the materials into that new innovation. And then lastly, it's important to think about regenerating people and regenerating our own confidence and the human spirit and our kind of ability to become more skillful and to become more able and to take on these various challenges that we have to do in order to create a sustainable society. This is an example of Soul Fire Farm in Albany, New York, that trains Black and Indigenous farmers on regenerative agriculture and other skills related to community building and construction and a variety of different skills that people take back when they start their own farms in their community, and they go on to spread, to create their own programs to create more nutritious food, to introduce youth to new skills in farming and other different employment, and really expand that, empower leaders to become leaders in their community, and then has a replicable effect across many different areas. So thank you so much. That's the end of my presentation. I'm going to open this up to any thoughts or comments or questions or that you might have based off of some of the ideas discussed, or any kind of thoughts you have in general. I know that in CCL that your focus on this larger carbon pricing or incentive and market changing policy, while it's at that larger level, it could have a lot of ripple effects to empower a lot of these examples that I shared of people who are maybe outliers on their community now, to really help them scale and expand. So while I shared a lot of often local initiatives, the larger things that you all do, I think is really important to allowing this kind of stuff to take off and expand more. So I'll open it all up for questions for you all, from you all.
And then Mary, and then George.
Yeah, I had just a comment. I was thinking about the Thunder Valley, the Native American town. And it seems like we're moving from this large corporate one-size-fits-all economic model down towards, an economic model that works here but not there, and another one that works there but not over there. And it seems like these small local models would be harder for powerful people to control and manage and extract from. But I'm wondering, is it more difficult to implement? Does it require more initiative and more effort at the local level? Like, it probably was easier for them to just take a check in the Pampers and the propane, but it's probably harder to form a new town. Is that accurate, or is we just shifting one unit of work for a corporation to another unit of work? Is it the same amount of effort or work?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. It is more work in order to do these smaller, more targeted local initiatives. I mean, to start Thunder Valley, they had something like 100 town hall meetings with people in order to gather input from people and figure out what kind of initiatives they wanted to focus on. And so, I mean, it is a trade-off that is really important to discuss and talk about. With, we could spend $1 trillion and quickly just like put that into a number of larger companies that could put it to use right away, or government agencies that have shovel-ready projects, and we could immediately just do that. But oftentimes those don't have really the intended benefit that they were designed to have, and at the same time can end up disempowering local leaders who have kind of spent a long time learning about what the unique needs are in each place and what would actually be beneficial. And so it's, yeah, we definitely have that trade-off, which, with the urgency of climate change is important to consider. But, Thunder Valley is funded by the housing department. And so they do get federal funding. And so and as well as Coalfield Development gets a lot of state funding. And so we can put our money into these, like at the federal level, into these projects. It's just a challenge of how it actually happens.
Hey, Trevor. Yeah, thanks for that presentation. That was really good. And hey to everyone. So this is actually my very first CCL meeting. So thank you for having me. So just I did a little bit of research before this, and from what I've heard today, it sounds like everyone's doing some really great things. So I'm happy to be here and to meet you all and to get involved here. But for Trevor, specifically to this, in your first part on the systems thinking, I couldn't help but think about some of like the urban areas around the country where they're sort of doing what you were saying, where they're trying to do a mixed use sort of thing in very urban areas, right? So I picture those buildings with the garden on the roof, or the lead buildings, right? So do you see that as sort of like a niche thing, or do you see that as taking on getting some momentum and becoming sort of the norm for urban environments?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see it as there's two things. I feel like there's a phase in which the type of thinking begins to change, which is, what this presentation is about thinking change. Right. And I think in terms of what people are talking about in that space, it's all about moving towards that mixed use development. Right. It's like what people are excited about. Yeah. And we see the same thing with regenerative agriculture. That's like what is really talked about, even like larger corporations. McDonald's is talking about that. Yeah. But we are still a little bit at the lip service phase, where we haven't quite moved into shifting the serious resources towards it. The real estate industry is still developing mostly single use neighborhoods. Right. Even though most city planners are starting to talk about mixed use. And so there's definitely a lag time between when people start to talk about these things, right, when they start to fully buy into it, and then when the actual resources change. And so I hope the resources change.
And how do you see as population density keeps going up, it seems to me that there's going to be even more pressure in the future for very concentrated one use areas, so where there used to be a garden, there could be a push for apartment buildings and commercial real estate, right? So as I just I'm thinking about where the population is going and the density and this sort of urbanization, where people are packing more and more into cities. So I'm just sort of wondering if how those two forces are going to collide.
Yeah, I mean, at a city density level, right. It definitely has to do whether or not we grow out or grow up has a lot to do with city policies and what they allow. And I know now cities are starting to allow upgrowth more, but you could also still have density and upgrowth, but have it not be very walkable at the same time. I mean,
Right.
LA is a very dense place, and has a lot of these like high-rise condos, but you still have to drive to the strip mall, or the giant mall in
Yeah.
order to get there.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's like, tends to be in more dense cities, there are more mixed stuff, but it's not a guarantee. And so,
Right.
yeah, mixed use can happen and walkability can happen in a small town, or it can happen in an urban core.
Sure. Interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
I'm curious if you've got any thoughts or seen anything promising about our heavy use of plastics and the ability to reduce that or to recycle it better. Like during COVID, I felt guilty about all the takeout I was getting in all these plastic containers.
Yeah, thanks for that question. There's there's a section of the book that talks about products and industry, and plastics is one of the chapters that's covered by it. I think one of the most inspiring stories in that chapter is a company out of the Bay Area that has developed a new way to create extremely biodegradable plastic using waste methane from landfills or wastewater treatment plants. And basically they have they've found this bacteria that has been in nature for 200 million years. It like tends to live in geysers or like swampy areas where there's like a lot of methane. And what it does is it takes methane as its food source, it eats it, and it builds up this storage reserve within it that is a naturally occurring polymer that can be shaped into a variety of different plastics. It can be used to create like hard plastics, including like casings for televisions, or like larger, more durable products, as well as stretched into thin films for plastic bottles and more fast-paced plastics and throwaway plastics. And because this material's been in nature for 200 million years, nature knows how to break it down. And so it can biodegrade in a home compost system compared to like, rather than, you don't even need an industrial compost system. It can biodegrade in the ocean, which is where a lot of our plastic is ending up. And while it is a small startup, and there's maybe a few other startups that are doing the same thing, there are over 2,000 facilities in the US that emit methane either from organic sources, either through landfills or wastewater treatment plants that have some way to capture it right now. And so what they envision is being able to have these kind of plastic or biopolymer producing systems at each one of these places that's preventing methane from going in the air, which is, as you know, greenhouse gas, as well as producing a extremely biodegradable form of plastic. So that's one example related to that.
Interesting.
They're called mango materials. Hey, Tony.
Hey, I just saw an interesting Washington Post interview with the head of the California, I can't remember, Energy Commission or something like that. And he was saying the average Californian uses 31% less energy than the rest of the United States. Okay, how did they get that way? He says it's a public-private partnerships and incremental change. It's not like one big fell swoop thing. And what I think is really, my big takeaway from that is the private-public partnership. So we need to have, involved government in this thing, competent, good, involved government in this to really make the necessary changes that have to be done. And then take that where you will in terms of your politics. Let's see, trying to think. Oh yeah, the other thing that occurred to me was that those energy cooperatives or something that they have the countywide cooperatives. That sounds like the old municipal electrical companies that are scattered around the United States everywhere. Basically, where the municipality says this is something that we want to take care of ourselves, and I think that should be taken a look at. Instead, something as important as power, as electricity to everybody, that maybe it should be taken off the for-profit books, because I think that's kind of what went wrong with capitalism, is the short-term outlook of when Harvard Business School started saying that shareholder value instead of the common value, and then we started getting these Wall Street raiders in and buying up these companies that used to be part of the community and shipping the jobs overseas and that kind of thing. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but anyway, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point on public-private partnerships and the relationship building part that takes time. And I think we need cooperation at many different levels, from like federal policy to down to state and local policies that can be interacting with the specific builders at the ground level, or the codes of cities that allow for greater energy efficiency and other stuff like that. That obviously a lot of that's being created by private businesses. They're either building stuff or retrofitting things, or individuals who are making those decisions. So yeah, it is really important to have that cross-sector collaboration. And then, yeah, in terms of energy, your comment is spot on that there's a lot of rural electric co-ops across the country, and that's how a lot of people get their energy. And a lot of times it was because, and started in the Great Depression, when the for-profit companies didn't think it was even worth it to build electricity there in rural areas. And so I think it was actually FDR started these, the rural electric co-op to expand electricity access. And, the energy, forever way it's set up as a monopoly, local monopolies. And so we're currently allowing mostly private companies to benefit from these monopolies, and they don't really innovate. They take advantage of different loopholes to build things they don't need and then charge us for it, which makes our electricity more expensive. But acknowledging the fact that we have a monopoly, it opens it up to what's a better way to go about it that's more fair to consumers if we have an unavoidable monopoly in that market.
Is there a kind of corporation, some states have it, where ethical values are a part of their charter? And I'm not sure how successful they are. Do you know anything about that? I'm real vague.
You mean in terms of the B Corp movement or public benefit corporations?
There we go. That was it. Yeah. I don't remember much about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a growing movement in terms of, basically, B Corp is a status that's unique, or you all might be familiar with this, but unique from C Corp, in that it allows businesses to make decisions that aren't 100% focused on maximizing shareholder value, and it legally allows them to make decisions that affect multiple stakeholders and might have a benefit, might not be the thing you would do if you're solely trying to maximize the profits of your shareholders. And then on top of that, there's a certifying agency that developed those standards called B Lab, which my wife actually used to be an intern there. And they're a certifying body that certifies companies on, I think, 6 different areas of good business, whether it's like in your supply chain, whether it's in governance, how you treat your employees. It's very comprehensive, and it's definitely a growing movement. I think when she started, there were only about 1,200 businesses, and I think there's probably over 3,000, 4,000, and including businesses like Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, you know, often tend to be more smaller businesses or luxury brands. But there was some talk about like when I think it was Ben and Jerry's acquired by Danone, a giant dairy food company, them talking about incorporating some of those values into what they do.
Thanks for calling tonight. Well, thank you again for coming, Trevor. This was great. Trevor, I don't know if you know that this is my, I'm resigning as group leader officially. Tonight's my last meeting.
Okay.
And so I'm so glad I was able to work with you and end my 8-year term, my 8 years as on a positive, uplifting, future-looking viewpoint. This is a good way to bring it to an end, and I'll still be in CCL, just not group leader anymore. So thank you for allowing me to end it on a positive, uplifting, forward-looking note. It's the way it should be.
Congratulations, Doug.
Of course.
That's amazing. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for your service. Who's stepping up? Who's going to be the new group leader?
Peg is talking to a few people, and I think we'll work it out. We'll work it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to share with you, as well as like learn from your insights and everything that you've learned over your experience as climate and sustainability advocates. Yeah, I would love to get in touch just to chat, or if there's any other, if you want to voice your thoughts on the book or concerns, or talk about anything else, you can reach me at trevor@brightgreenfuture.com. And also, if you would like a copy of the book, you can get 15% off by using the promo code Climate Lobby on brightgreenfuture.com, and I will send you a signed copy with a handwritten note. And so, yeah, thank you all. It's been a pleasure to see you all, and thank you so much, Doug, for inviting me to speak.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Trevor.
Thanks, Trevor.